We are soon entering 2023, and I thought to myself, what better way to end 2022 than by talking about this year's biggest surprise? Hi and welcome to this channel. If you're new here, I'm Øystein and I'm Norwegian. This is pretty relevant today because if I hadn't been Norwegian, I don't think I would have read these books. And the reason is simple. The concept of a man writing thousands of pages about himself isn't something that I thought I would be into, but something about these novels I truly loved. So in this video I'm going to try to explain to you why I spent the last 3 months going through them. A couple of disclaimers before I start. The first one is that I listened to all of these on audiobook, so if that matters to you, there you have it. And the second one is that it's impossible to talk about all these 6 books without giving you any spoilers, so if you're afraid of spoilers, then you probably shouldn't watch this video. Let's start at the beginning with the first one. And in this one we follow Knausgård in his youth and him experiencing the death of his father. The reason I started reading this novel was actually because I wanted to get rid of the books I had. I had the 4 first books in the series, and at some point I thought I'd never read them. I thought I'd mention it because now it seems kinda silly. I think the reason why I kept on going after reading this one is because of all the things that I could relate to in this one. How he related to arts in general, especially the music. I felt that we could have been friends if we grew up together. Language-wise, I was so impressed of how well he kept my attention, even though he didn't write about that much. Because there are quite a lot of pages and not that much said, but still that much said without me tiring from it. And that's basically why I decided to pick up the second one. In the second one, he breaks up with his girlfriend, he moves to Sweden, and he meets his wife. And after a while they have children. And this is kind of the love story where he explores how it is living with someone and having children. Was that a bit redundant? This one made it hard not to continue reading because this is sort of the situation I'm in now. And reading about a man that's so frustrated with his life in such a direct form is very fascinating. Reading the second one really made me think, what is he not telling us? Can I expect him to be so honest in the next books to come? That was really what I was thinking about when finishing up this one. Also, as a Norwegian, it was quite fun hearing him talk about the differences between Norway and Sweden. In addition to me thinking that everyone could see themselves in Knausgård's writing somehow. Then he starts talking about his childhood, and at this point I'm very confused of why he has written the books in the order that he has. And that will continue for a while. I thought this book was way too much about him crying, not succeeding in the things he wanted to do, and I felt this one in the language as well was kind of repetitive. Whereas in the other books he writes about a topic to the point where I'm almost full and then stops. But in this one, he kept on going. The thing I found interesting is where he talks about how difficult it is to remember what really happened in one's early life. And he says he struggles himself. So that leads us over to the debate whether this has happened and how much is fictionalized. In the fourth one, he's finishing school, he goes up north to become a teacher, and then he starts his journey towards becoming an author. And at the same time as he revisits the death of his father. I felt this one jumped a bit more than the others, making it feel a bit more fast-paced. I really enjoyed the descriptions of his stay up north, and the most memorable thing about this one was when he called Jon Fosses a local amateur. He'll talk more about that in the fifth one. In the fifth novel, and the one that I don't own, he moves to Bergen and studies. He's definitely going to be a writer at this point, and we're wondering at some point if he's also going to be an alcoholic. Many things point towards that. Reading number 5, I really started wondering what would this look like if he had written it whilst he was doing it. Because looking back at his student years, so many things happened, and some of the stuff that he went through was pretty wild. He talks about it in a real sincere way, as he does with everything, but I'm just curious, how would it look if it was just him and the time then and there? When reading that one, I felt like he was a real stereotype, and I felt kind of bad for him. while at the same time not at all. Then over to the last one and the biggest break, and that's number 6. This I was really looking forward to, and I think that after reading the 4th novel, what kept me going was really the thought of reading this and getting it all explained. But what is number 6 really about? Well, it's about the time where the first novels are published and his thoughts around it. The only thing is that his thoughts also include like many hundred pages about Hitler, which I don't understand. This was supposed to tie it all together, but I felt like the opposite thing happened. But at least when he's writing this novel, many of the things that he writes about is happening at the same time as he's writing about them, which is another kind of novel than the other ones. This is the novel where you feel free to just write all the words that you sort of held back in the other ones. Whereas in the second one and the 4th one, for example, you wrote a lot about small things that happened, but at some point you just stopped, whereas in this one you never really stopped. I'm sure the only thing that stopped him from writing more was a publishing date or something like that. He also gives us the impression that he had little time to write this one, but it sure doesn't feel like it. I also had to go online after reading this one and see what other people thought of this. Is it just me that thought it was a bit much about Hitler? And I think it was the New York Times where the reviewer just said that he'd never wanted to finish a book more than he wanted to finish this one. So I guess I'm not alone on that one. To summarize my thoughts around these books, I've tried to categorize them, and I'll go through one category at a time. The first one is the relatability, because there really is a clear line between how relatable the things are and what I thought of the novels. Not 100% of course, but pretty close. Not necessarily if I could see myself in the things that happened, but rather that I could see the things happening in the novels happening to people around me. As I said, they were pretty relatable to people in general, not me especially. There are 2 examples that I would like to talk about. The first one is the second novel, as I told you, how much our situations match in some ways. And that makes me feel compassion with him, at the same time as I feel like in the second one he was just being a total ass. Maybe deep inside me I want to do the things that he did. I don't think so, but at least it's very interesting to hear him say those things out loud. And it sort of justified the genre for me reading the second one. Then we have book number 5, where he pretty much was alcoholized the whole book. And that I can't relate to at all almost. But I have so many friends in that context, being a student, drinking a bit too much, doing stupid things, thinking about themselves in the way that Knausgård describes thinking about himself. And those 2 are 2 books that I enjoyed out of these. Of course, Knausgård is a man, he's brought up in Norway, but for all of these novels, Knausgård writes about things in such broad strokes that I think that most people would find something that they could relate to. And if not, they could probably like the language. Which leads me over to the writing, of course, and I've seen some places talking about his language being so direct that you sort of wonder whether it's correct or not. Meaning that he could say things like I mentioned before, that he doesn't remember anything from his childhood except he wrote a book about it. Which makes you question, has these things happened or not? And in that sense he's delivering a double message, planned I guess, to confuse us. I don't know if that was effective for me, because from the get-go I just thought that everything in these novels is true. All of these things have happened, because there's no way that I should know if they hadn't. Which of course is one of the most problematic things about these novels, but I'll come back to that later. The thing that made me believe him and continue believing him was all the stupid things he said. Not only about himself, but he described his own really bad behavior towards others. And that makes you think that no one really wants to hurt oneself as much as this. But then again, if he writes all these novels just to become famous, this is one way of doing it, and if this is made to make me feel like I should believe him, well, he has succeeded. So if he's really cynical, this is one great way of doing it. Also, many of these quotes were so far out that they became funny to me, Especially one scene where he went into this store, he saw this woman, and she didn't give him the look that he thought he deserved. Then he started doubting himself, and then he went over thinking that why should I care? She's fat. So she's unattractive, so I shouldn't really care what she thinks. Which is just it's so ignorant that it becomes funny. So the things that become funny to me is him doubting himself and taking it out on others in outrageous ways. Which leads me over to the point of self-irony, because I can't really believe that it's possible to write all these without having massive amounts. How can he, for example, write about his anger towards people with suitcases on wheels without having a massive shield of self-irony to hide behind? At the same time, he jokes openly about things that are considered manly. He might doubt his skills as a man in some regards, but he also has an exaggerated belief in his own looks. And in the 5th novel, he gets a new colleague, and he says something like, "She's indifferent to me. Could she be a lesbian?" Because there's no way he thinks that she isn't into him. How could she not? He's so handsome and smart and has that special thing that women love. And quotes like that from a man in his 40s, 50s looking back at his student years makes me really baffled, because how could someone at that age write so bluntly about themselves, depicting themselves in such a bad way? It's just fascinating. But he must have had massive amounts of self-irony to write things like that, I believe. One thing is Knausgård talking about himself and the thing he has lived through. But in order to get there, he has to talk about a lot of other people. And I don't think I would have read these books if it hadn't been for the people around him. And the way he talks about them, frankly. I really don't care how he talks about himself, but how he talks about others actually matter. And I do think the person that's worst off in these novels is his wife Linda. And of course his children. None other than Linda, I feel, is talked about in the way that Knausgård talks about her. Which is at times awful. But as I mentioned, he's also awful when speaking about himself in that 2nd novel. Does it weigh up for the things that he says about her? Of course not, and that's because she doesn't talk about him. It's only one-way communication. This is something I hear quite often, especially when watching the news. It's talk about who's owning the story, who's in charge of the narrative, and I haven't given it a lot of thought before I started reading Knausgård. And I stopped several times while reading these novels and kept on thinking, do I think this is interesting because Knausgård says it's interesting, or do I genuinely feel that this is interesting? And do I believe you? Is this the way it happened? And this is where it comes into play how much you relate to the story. Because if you relate a whole lot to the plot and to the things he says, then you might be more able to think critically of it. How would you react in that same situation? Several times I felt like I wouldn't have reacted at all, like his wife acted in that situation, which made me believe that something's wrong here. But that doesn't work either. You can't just compare yourself to the characters in the novel. I don't think me and Linda are that similar after all. But the thing about owning the narrative irritated me, because it made me feel insecure as the person reading these novels. Why can't it all be black and white? I guess it's not the right genre for that. I'll end with talking about one of my absolute favorite things about these novels. And about Knausgård, I guess. And that's how he describes art. Art is a central theme in all of these novels. Whether it's music, pop music, or it's classic paintings, or books. And the thing that gets me is how he manages to draw parallels between different art forms and different art periods. As someone that knows very, very little about high forms of art, this intrigued me a lot. It made me even buy this book, where Karl Ove Knausgård talks about Edvard Munch's paintings, which is something I wasn't ready to think about doing before I read Knausgård. So that's a huge positive. Also, I felt like he was really good at giving me pointers towards which books I might enjoy or not. For example, after reading My Struggle series, I've given up trying to read Ulysses by James Joyce. Because how Knausgård talks about that novel being important just makes me not want to read it at all. So it's not like I ended up wanting to read all the books that's mentioned in the series, even though if someone does that, I would watch that YouTube video all night long, because that would be a journey, I guess. There are a lot of books mentioned, but they aren't all for me. Maybe Karl Ove Knausgård would be a perfect librarian. Who knows? Probably would. He reads a lot. Many of you that watch my videos have asked me why I've read Karl Ove Knausgård, and I have been quite unsure myself. But with this video, I hope to have given you insights into my brain and how I think and what I think about these books, to maybe try to better understand why I did it. Just speaking for myself, I think I know more about my relationship towards Karl Ove Knausgård now than I did a couple of weeks ago at least. When I started reading Knausgård, this year really took a turn, because this is one of those paths I didn't know my life would lead down. And I'm really happy it did. It was a really fun experience, and spending this much time with one author, I do believe that there is some form of thing binding you together in a weird way. I don't think I will ever forget the time where I read 6 Karl Ove Knausgård books. It's just too much time spent to forget. And now we're looking into 2023, and I just wanted to say to all of you that have watched my videos this past year, thank you so much. It means a whole lot to me that you stick around, so thank you again. I wish you all the best for 2023, and I'll see you there. Bye!